Something unusual is happening at the top of the Israeli government, and it is generating more questions than answers. Benjamin Netanyahu was absent from an emergency security cabinet meeting convened specifically to discuss Iran's military response at one of the most critical moments of this conflict. The meeting proceeded without him. Defense Minister Israel Katz formally declared the Prime Minister absent and took control of the session. This was not a routine briefing. This was the War Cabinet meeting, where Israel's response to the most intensive Iranian strikes of the entire conflict was being planned and coordinated. And the man who initiated this war was not in the room. That absence was confirmed not by Iranian state media, not by opposition politicians looking to score points, but by the Times of Israel. Israeli media, with direct knowledge of security cabinet protocols, reported that what occurred was historically anomalous. The Prime Minister of Israel does not miss security cabinet sessions during active military conflict. The protocol exists precisely because these moments are when the country's leadership must be present, visible, and demonstrably in command. The protocol is not informal guidance. It is the institutional recognition that leadership continuity during active war is not optional. Before going further, it is necessary to establish clearly what is confirmed and what remains in the analytical category of open questions. Because in a conflict this volatile, the distance between those two categories is where misinformation travels fastest and where the most consequential misunderstandings take root. What is confirmed? Netanyahu did not attend the Security Cabinet meeting. He was formally declared absent by the Defense Minister. Israel Katz chaired the session in his place. Israeli media reported this with the specificity that comes from sources inside the security establishment. No official explanation for the absence was provided at the time of the meeting. What is contested is the reason for that absence. Iranian state media and IRGC-aligned channels moved quickly after the absence became known to construct a narrative suggesting a significant strike had targeted Israeli leadership. Pakistani media outlets reported that a drone attack had been more consequential than Israel was prepared to publicly acknowledge. Chinese, Russian, and Turkish media carried similar reporting. Western outlets have stated that Netanyahu is alive and that his absence had an unspecified operational explanation. The gap between those two characterizations is the space this analysis is examining. What is documented but unexplained? An Indian journalist working for a major outlet was arrested, confirmed by Gulf media and corroborated by multiple regional sources, following a live broadcast in which he appeared to be transmitting from a location where Netanyahu was physically present. The journalist reportedly identified the Prime Minister on camera during a live transmission. Shortly afterward, a strike was reported in the area. The journalist was arrested on grounds of exposing Israeli national security. If the arrest reflects what the official justification states, it means Netanyahu was at a specific sensitive location whose coordinates were effectively disclosed in real time to anyone watching the broadcast. The arrest itself is confirmed. The operational sequence connecting that disclosure to what followed is the subject of competing accounts that available evidence cannot resolve definitively. What can be stated analytically is this. A head of state who is genuinely well, fully operational, and in command of a country at the most dangerous moment of its most significant military conflict in decades does not allow 48 hours to pass without a credible documented public appearance. Netanyahu is a politician who has consistently sought the camera during every previous military confrontation. The 12-day war, the Gaza operations, every prior security crisis produced immediate, repeated, high-visibility public appearances in which he projected command, decisiveness, and personal control. That pattern is not incidental. It is a deliberate political strategy that Netanyahu has executed consistently across decades of Israeli public life. His consistent behavior in every prior crisis makes his absence in this one analytically significant regardless of what ultimately explains it. The Israeli government's response to the questions surrounding his whereabouts came in the form of video footage. First, a brief appearance behind a curtain in an undisclosed location. Then, a subsequent clip that appears to show him in a cafe setting. Both videos immediately generated intense scrutiny across social media platforms and in professional analytical circles. Independent fact-checkers, including PolitiFact and Grok on the X platform, were compelled to address questions about visual anomalies that spread rapidly, apparent inconsistencies in the footage that multiple observers flagged as potentially indicating manipulation. Official accounts attributed these anomalies to optical illusions and compression artifacts. The fact-checkers concluded the footage was genuine, but the analytical question worth asking is not whether any specific visual anomaly proves manipulation. The analytical question is why, at the most critical moment of an active war, the leader of one of the world's most sophisticated military states is communicating his status to the public through informal cafe footage, rather than standing in front of a camera in a secure facility delivering a direct address to the nation. Netanyahu has never previously communicated through informal setting footage during a security crisis. He has always chosen the press conference, the podium, the war room backdrop, settings that project authority and command. The departure from that consistent pattern, regardless of what explains it, is itself an analytical data point that demands examination. While the questions around Netanyahu's status were circulating, the conflict itself was escalating to a new threshold. The IRGC confirmed the launch of what it designated the 54th wave of Operation True Promise 4, and this wave was categorically different from previous ones in a specific and significant way. For the first time in this conflict, Iran deployed ultra-heavy missiles against what it described as Israeli decision-making centers. The systems used included K-bar Shikan missiles armed with 2-ton warheads, the heaviest conventional warhead in Iran's deployed arsenal. Alongside these, Iran confirmed the combat deployment of the Sejil solid-fuel strategic missile for the first time during this operation. The Sejil represents a significant escalation in capability beyond what Iran has previously committed in this conflict. Unlike the liquid-fueled systems that have comprised the majority of previous waves, a solid-fuel missile requires no fueling preparation time before launch. It can be fired within minutes of the launch decision. There is no exposure window during which satellite surveillance can detect fueling operations and provide warning. It is faster to deploy, harder to detect in pre-launch preparation, and capable of ranges that cover every American and Israeli military installation in the region. Its confirmed combat deployment signals a deliberate decision by Iranian commanders to commit a higher tier of strategic capability than previously employed. The targeting of decision-making centers, command infrastructure, military coordination facilities, intelligence processing installations, rather than purely military hardware, represents a specific and coherent operational logic. When you target a country's military hardware, you degrade its capacity to fight. When you target the infrastructure through which military decisions are made, transmitted, and coordinated, you degrade the organizational coherence that determines how effectively that hardware is employed. Iran has been executing both tracks simultaneously across this conflict, but the confirmed deployment of the Sejil and the explicit designation of decision-making centers as primary targets suggests the second track is now being elevated in strategic priority. Simultaneously, Hezbollah launched coordinated attacks from southern Lebanon. Israeli military sources cited by Israeli press described the level of command, control, and synchronization demonstrated in the Hezbollah component as inconsistent with the characterization of Hezbollah as a degraded and weakened force that Israeli government communications had been presenting consistently for months. What those Israeli analysts described was not a militia operating at the margins of its remaining capacity. It was an organization demonstrating high-level operational coherence, timing its strikes to coincide precisely with the Iranian wave, hitting targets that maximize the stress on Israeli defensive systems already saturated by the primary assault from the east. The narrative that Hezbollah had been effectively neutralized by sustained Israeli bombing campaigns, that its command and control had been disrupted beyond meaningful function, that its capacity to coordinate large-scale operations had been permanently reduced. That narrative did not survive the night of March 14th. The economic dimension of what is happening deserves direct attention because it reaches every person watching this analysis, regardless of their geographic proximity to the conflict. Israel's war is currently costing its economy approximately $3 billion per week in direct losses: military operations, civilian disruption, business closures, lost commerce. Preliminary estimates suggest the American side of this conflict is running at approximately $1 billion per day in direct costs. Combined, that is approximately $10 billion per week being consumed by this conflict. And neither side has publicly stated what conditions would bring it to an end. The Brent crude price data froze for approximately 2 days. The public-facing oil price feeds stopped updating in real time, an anomaly that anyone monitoring energy markets noticed and could not explain through normal market mechanics. Oil pricing data does not freeze because markets close for the night. The crude market is continuous. A freeze in the publicly displayed price data during an active military conflict that has closed the Strait of Hormuz, destroyed a major international airport, struck Gulf energy infrastructure across multiple countries, and eliminated commercial shipping from the region's primary waterway is not a technical glitch. It is a signal that something in the energy market information architecture was being managed in a way the normal public data flow was not designed to accommodate. Israel's emergency state declaration has been extended through the end of March. That extension means the legal framework of exceptional powers, reduced civilian oversight, expanded executive authority, justification for decisions that would otherwise require public accountability, is going to remain in place. Emergency state declarations in active conflicts consistently serve dual purposes: genuine security necessity on one hand, political insulation from scrutiny on the other. The polls inside Israel show sharply rising opposition to Netanyahu's management of the conflict. Extending the state of emergency means continuing to operate in a framework where that opposition has fewer institutional mechanisms to express itself consequentially. The deterrence framework that Israel's security strategy has rested on for decades operated on a specific premise: that Israeli military capability was so overwhelming and Israeli willingness to use it so unquestioned that adversaries would calculate the cost of attacking as prohibitive. That framework required adversaries to believe both that Israel could defend itself effectively and that the consequences of attacking would be so severe as to make the attempt irrational. Both components of that framework were tested on the night of March 14th. Iron Dome fired 31 interceptors and stopped 0 missiles at Ben Gurion. Ultra-heavy missiles struck decision-making infrastructure in central Israel for the first time in this conflict. A second front from Lebanon demonstrated coordination and capability that Israeli official communications had described as no longer existing. And the Prime Minister was absent from the Security Cabinet meeting, where the response to all of this was being planned. Deterrence is not purely a function of military capability. It is a function of perception, the adversary's belief that the costs of action outweigh the potential gains. When the actions of the last 24 hours are processed by every actor in this region, calculating their own position and interests, the perception being updated is not one that strengthens Israel's deterrence posture. Iran has now deployed its heaviest missiles against Israeli decision-making infrastructure. It has coordinated that deployment with a Hezbollah attack demonstrating higher organizational capability than was publicly acknowledged. It has struck Ben Gurion International Airport, closed the Strait of Hormuz for 15 consecutive days, attacked Gulf energy infrastructure across multiple countries, and issued ceasefire conditions that every professional analyst describes as structurally impossible for Washington to accept. Israel has conducted hundreds of strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, command centers, and missile stockpiles. It has sustained losses in F-15 attrition, in the carrier group repositioning, in the KC-135 loss, and in ongoing casualty figures that official communications have consistently characterized differently from what the operational evidence documents. Neither side has announced an exit. Neither side has stated publicly what would constitute an acceptable end to this conflict. And the man who was the primary architect of the decision to launch it on February 28th is currently the subject of a 48-hour information gap that Israeli media, Iranian state media, Pakistani outlets, and Gulf regional sources are all covering from different angles, with different conclusions and no verified resolution. The first casualty of war is verified information. Everything that seems certain today can be overturned tomorrow. That is not a reason to stop analyzing. It is a reason to analyze more carefully, with higher evidentiary standards, and with the intellectual honesty to distinguish between what is documented, what is contested, and what remains genuinely unknown. Leave one question in the comments. What do you think explains Netanyahu's absence from the most important security meeting of this war? Every response gets read. Evidence first, analysis second.